The crowd's deafening roar crashes like waves against the ring in Kinshasa, Zaire. It's 4 in the morning, yet 80,000 people scream themselves hoarse under the unforgiving African heat. George Foreman, the undefeated heavyweight champion of the world, swings another devastating blow that somehow misses Muhammad Ali's chin by millimeters. Ali's back presses against the ropes, sweat flying from his face with each thunderous attack from the younger, stronger champion. "You hit like a sissy, George," Ali taunts, his voice barely audible over the chanting crowd. "Is that all you got?" Foreman's eyes narrow, rage building inside him. He's knocked out every man who stepped into the ring with him. Joe Frazier, Ken Norton, fighters who beat Ali. Foreman destroyed them in 2 rounds. Yet here's Ali, somehow still standing in the 7th round, smiling at him like he knows something Foreman doesn't. In his corner, Angelo Dundee frantically shouts instructions at Ali while across the ring. Foreman's trainer Dick Sadler stares in disbelief. Nobody lasts this long against George Foreman. Nobody. Foreman launches another crushing right hook, a punch that could fell a tree. But just as it's about to connect, something inside him hesitates. For a fraction of a second, his fist pulls back ever so slightly. Only Ali notices. Their eyes meet in that suspended moment, and understanding passes between them. The champion had held back. The question is why? 20 miles away from the fight venue, in a dimly lit hotel room, a man named Charles watches the fight on a small television, clutching a photo of a young George Foreman. "Don't do it, son," he whispers. "Some victories cost too much." The letter beside him remains unsealed, its contents potentially more devastating than any punch thrown in that ring tonight. Back in the arena, the referee separates the fighters as the bell rings. Round 7 is over. Ali, exhausted but unbroken, returns to his corner. Foreman trudges to his, looking confused for the first time in his professional career. The crowd continues its hypnotic chant, "Ali Bomaye, Ali Bomaye, Ali, kill him." What they don't realize is that something profound has shifted in George Foreman's mind. A truth he's been running from for years is about to surface, and the price of this fight suddenly seems too high, even for the heavyweight championship of the world. The next 3 minutes would change boxing history forever. The journey to this fateful moment began 15 years earlier. A 13-year-old George Foreman huddled in the corner of a rundown gym in Houston's 5th Ward, watching a young Olympic champion named Cassius Clay on a grainy black-and-white television. The boy who would become Muhammad Ali danced around the ring with a grace that seemed impossible for a heavyweight, his lightning-fast combinations leaving his opponent bewildered. "That boy ain't right in the head," muttered Doc Williams, the old trainer who ran the gym. "Talented, sure, but his mouth's gonna get him killed one day." Young George said nothing, mesmerized by the fighter on screen. Unlike the other boxers who came through Doc's gym, hard men with harder lives who fought like they were in a street brawl, Clay moved like water, effortless and fluid. In that moment, something awakened in George, a realization that fighting could be more than just violence. It could be art. "You like what you see, boy?" A deep voice startled George from behind. Charles Johnson, a former heavyweight contender whose career ended after an eye injury, stood watching the same broadcast. People said Charles could have been champion if not for bad luck and worse management. "Yes, sir," George replied, unable to tear his eyes from the screen. Charles studied the skinny teenager, noting the raw power in his shoulders despite his youth. "You want to fight like that?" George shook his head. "No, sir. I want to hit harder than anybody ever has." Charles laughed, a sound like gravel underfoot. "Come see me tomorrow morning, 5 a.m. We'll see what you're made of." He walked away, leaving George with a choice that would alter the course of his life. The next morning, George arrived at 4:30, afraid of missing his opportunity. Charles found him doing push-ups outside the locked gym door. "First lesson," Charles said, unlocking the door. "A fighter's greatest weapon isn't his fists, it's his heart. Let me show you something about that boy Cassius you were watching yesterday." In a small back office, Charles pulled out a newspaper clipping. "This is from 2 years ago. Clay refused to fight a man because he found out the promoter wouldn't allow black folks to sit ringside. Cost him good money, but he stood his ground." George looked confused. "What's that got to do with fighting?" "Everything," Charles replied. "When you step into that ring, you bring your whole self. Everything you believe. Everything you stand for. Clay fights for something bigger than himself. That's why he'll be remembered when fighters with better records are long forgotten." For the next 5 years, Charles became George's shadow, teaching him not just how to throw punches, but why every punch mattered. When George's temper flared, as it often did, Charles would make him run until his anger dissolved into exhaustion. "Anger makes you strong for a minute," he'd say. "Discipline makes you strong for life." By 18, George had transformed from a troubled youth into a disciplined fighter with hands that could crack concrete. Charles arranged his first amateur bout against a more experienced fighter named Raymond Peters. The night before the fight, he found George staring at a poster of Cassius Clay, now Muhammad Ali, who had recently shocked the world by beating Sonny Liston for the heavyweight title. "You still admire him?" Charles asked. "He backs up everything he says," George replied. "But I don't understand why he changed his name or joined that Muslim group, or why he's always talking about politics." Charles sat beside his young fighter. "Not every battle happens in the ring, son. Sometimes the hardest fights are against things bigger than any one man. Like injustice, like a system that wants to keep you in your place. Ali's fighting those battles his way." George won his first fight with a knockout in the second round. As the referee raised his hand, he looked for Charles in the crowd but couldn't find him. Later, he discovered Charles had stepped outside, unable to watch the culmination of his teaching. "I couldn't bear to see it if you lost," he admitted. "You're like a son to me now." Those words lodged in George's heart like a seed that would grow roots over years to come. When George won Olympic gold in 1968, Charles was there in Mexico City, weeping openly as the American flag rose and the anthem played. "You've made me proud, son," he said, embracing George. "But the real test is what you do with this success." 3 years later, Charles wasn't there to see George demolish Joe Frazier to become heavyweight champion of the world. No one had heard from him in months. The letters George sent to his last known address in Philadelphia returned unopened. The man who had shaped him into a champion had vanished from his life just when he'd reached the summit. The night before the Ali fight in Zaire, as George prepared in his hotel room, a local boy delivered an envelope. Inside was a short note. "Remember what I taught you about why we fight. Some victories cost too much. I'll be watching. Charles." After 15 years, his mentor had resurfaced. But what did the cryptic message mean? And why now, on the eve of the biggest fight of his career? The 7th round bell rings, snapping George back to the present. The crowd's roar intensifies as the fighters return to center ring. Ali's strategy, what he would later call rope-a-dope, has worked brilliantly. He's allowed Foreman to punch himself into exhaustion against the ropes, absorbing punishment while conserving his own energy. "Come on, Big George, show me something," Ali taunts, dancing away from Foreman's increasingly labored punches. Foreman pursues him doggedly, but doubt has crept into his mind. The strange hesitation in round 7, the punch he pulled, troubles him. He's never held back before. What changed? From his ringside seat, Howard Costle's voice carries through the broadcast to millions watching worldwide. Foreman looks tired. For the first time in his career, the champion appears vulnerable. In his mind, George hears Charles's voice from years ago. "A true champion knows when not to throw a punch. That's wisdom most fighters never learn." Ali springs forward suddenly, landing a quick combination that rocks Foreman back on his heels. The crowd erupts. "Ali Bomaye, Ali Bomaye." In that moment, as Foreman struggles to maintain his balance, a realization crystallizes in his mind. Charles knew this would happen. Somehow, he knew Ali would find a way to turn George's strength against him. Is that what his message meant? That this victory would cost too much? No, there's something deeper. As Ali circles him, Foreman remembers another lesson from Charles. Every fighter has a secret, something they protect more fiercely than their title or their record. Find that secret and you understand the man. What was Ali's secret? What drove him to risk everything, his title, his freedom, his reputation, for his beliefs? And what was Charles trying to tell him with that cryptic note? Ali lunges forward again, this time landing a sharp right hand that snaps Foreman's head back. For a moment, stars explode behind the champion's eyes. He's been hit hard before, but never like this. Never when his body was so depleted, his mind so conflicted. As George struggles to stay upright, time seems to slow. In this suspended moment, memories flood back. Charles teaching him to read when the schools had failed him. Charles posting bail when he'd gotten into trouble. Charles pushing him to be more than just another strong kid from the streets. Then it hits him harder than any punch Ali has thrown. Charles had become the father he never had. And now, after all these years of silence, He reappears with a warning about this particular fight, this particular opponent. "What do you know, Charles?" George whispers to himself as he narrowly evades another alley combination. "What are you trying to tell me?" The ring lights suddenly seem too bright, the noise of the crowd too intense. Something is wrong. Not just with the fight, but with everything leading up to it. The pieces don't fit. Why here? Why Ali? Why now? Ali senses Foreman's distraction and presses his advantage, landing another combination that forces the champion to clinch. As the referee separates them, Ali whispers something only George can hear. "He sent me a letter too." Foreman freezes. "What?" But Ali has already danced away, leaving George stunned in the center of the ring. The 18th of June, 1966. Muhammad Ali, then Cassius Clay, sits in a Stark government office, facing the draft board that will decide his fate. The Vietnam War rages overseas, and the heavyweight champion has been called to serve. "I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong," he declares. "No Viet Cong ever called me nigger." The statement sends shockwaves through America. The next day, he refuses induction into the armed forces. Within hours, boxing commissions begin stripping him of his titles. The golden boy of American boxing becomes a pariah overnight. That evening, as reporters camp outside his hotel, a hotel worker slips him an envelope. "A man asked me to give you this, champ." Inside is a simple note: "Stand your ground. The hardest fights aren't in the ring. Charles Johnson." Ali doesn't know the name, but the message resonates. During the 3 years of exile that follow, his prime fighting years sacrificed for his principles, he rereads that note countless times, drawing strength from a stranger's support when so many others abandoned him. 7 years later, as Ali prepares for the Foreman fight in his Kinshasa hotel room, another envelope arrives. Inside is a photograph of a young Charles Johnson standing beside an even younger man who looks remarkably like George Foreman. The note simply reads, "He doesn't know, but after tomorrow night he must. The truth will free you both." Ali stares at the photo for hours, understanding finally dawning. "My God," he whispers, "they're father and son." Now as the 8th round begins in Kinshasa, both fighters carry a secret larger than the championship itself. Ali has figured it out. Foreman is still piecing it together. The crowd's chanting becomes a single wall of sound as Ali suddenly abandons his defensive posture. He steps forward, meeting Foreman in the center of the ring, no longer retreating. "Your daddy's watching," Ali says quietly during a clinch. Foreman pushes him away, confusion and anger warring on his face. "What did you say?" "Charles Johnson, your trainer, your mentor." Ali dances away, then back in. "Your father." Something breaks inside George Foreman. Not his spirit, but the dam holding back years of questions. Why did Charles disappear? Why did he reappear now? Was Ali telling the truth? In his distraction, he misses Ali's setup, a left jab followed by a straight right. As Foreman turns, Ali delivers the combination that boxing historians will discuss for decades. A left hook to the body followed by a lightning-fast right cross to the jaw. The mighty George Foreman, undefeated, seemingly invincible, tumbles to the canvas like a redwood finally surrendering to the axe. The referee begins the count. 1, 2, 3. Foreman rolls onto his side, his gloves searching for the canvas to push himself up. 4, 5, 6. In the crowd, a man rises from his seat, older now, grayer, but unmistakably Charles Johnson. "Stay down, son," he whispers. "Some lessons can only be learned in defeat." 7, 8. Foreman makes it to his knees, but the world spins around him. 9, 10. The referee waves his arms. It's over. Muhammad Ali has done the impossible. Muhammad Ali has regained the heavyweight championship of the world, Howard Cosell screams into his microphone. The greatest upset in boxing history, as Ali's corner rushes the ring, lifting their fighter onto their shoulders. Foreman remains on his knees, not from the knockout but from the revelation that has staggered him more than any punch. Across the ring, through the chaos of celebration, his eyes lock with Ali's. The new champion gives him a slight nod, an acknowledgement of respect, of understanding. Later that night, as dawn breaks over Kinshasa, a knock comes at Foreman's hotel room door. He opens it to find Charles Johnson standing there, older than in his memories but instantly recognizable. "It's time we talked, son," Charles says. George steps aside to let him enter, then closes the door on the world outside. For the next 3 hours, father and son reconstruct a fragmented history. How Charles had left to pursue his boxing career when George was just an infant. How he'd returned years later to find George's mother remarried. How he'd made the painful decision to be George's mentor, rather than reveal a truth that might shatter the boy's world. Why now? George finally asks. Why reveal everything after all these years? Charles looks down at his weathered hands. Because when I saw you in that ring with Ali, I saw myself. All my anger, all my power, all my hunger for victory at any cost. I couldn't let you make the same mistakes I did. And Ali? How does he fit into this? Ali understands something I tried to teach you, that some battles are bigger than boxing. I reached out to him years ago during his exile. We became friends. When this fight was announced, I knew it would be the turning point for both of you. George sits silently, absorbing everything. So when I pulled that punch in the 7th round, your heart knew what your head didn't, Charles says. Deep down you recognized what Ali was fighting for. Not just a title, but redemption, justice, his place in history. Some part of you respected that too much to destroy it. The sun rises fully over Kinshasa as father and son continue their conversation, beginning to forge a relationship that should have existed decades earlier. Outside celebrations for Ali's victory continue across the city. But inside this quiet room, George Foreman wins something more valuable than any championship belt: the truth about himself and his heritage. 10 years later, a very different George Foreman steps into a Houston pulpit. After his defeat to Ali, he experienced a profound religious conversion, leaving boxing to become a minister. The anger that once defined him has transformed into compassion. I thought losing was the worst thing that could happen to me, he tells his congregation. Turns out it was the best. Sometimes God uses defeat to lead us to greater victories. In the back of the church sits an elderly Charles Johnson, now openly acknowledged as George's father. Beside him is a surprise visitor, Muhammad Ali, whose own health has begun to decline, but whose spirit remains undiminished. After the service, the 3 men share a meal at George's home. Ali, his hands already showing signs of the Parkinson's that would eventually silence his famous voice, manages to deliver one more piece of poetry. I made you famous, George, he says with a grin. Without me, you'd just be another pretty face. They laugh together, these former rivals now bound by respect and shared history. As they part ways, Ali embraces Foreman. That punch you pulled in the 7th round, he whispers. I never told anyone. That was between you and your conscience. George nods, grateful for the discretion. You knew I'd figure it out eventually? I knew you had a heart too big to stay angry forever, Ali replies. Just like your father. In 1994, 20 years after his defeat to Ali, George Foreman would shock the world again by reclaiming the heavyweight championship at age 45, the oldest heavyweight champion in history. In his autobiography, he would dedicate the victory to 2 men, Charles Johnson, who taught him that losing could be a gift, and Muhammad Ali, who showed him that the greatest victories happen outside the ring. The story of why George Foreman pulled his punch in round 7 remained a private matter between the 3 men, a moment of humanity in a sport defined by brutality, a split-second decision that changed not just the outcome of a legendary fight, but the course of 3 interconnected lives. In Kinshasa, they still tell the story of the rumble in the jungle, but few know the deeper truth, that sometimes, in refusing to strike your hardest blow, you discover your greatest strength.